A lot of people have been hurt by this COVID-19 stuff. Loggers, I just want to ask our North Carolina's governors and loggers Carolina. We're in pain right now and could use some support. Swamp Loggers wasn't just another show about actual life. It was a raw, unfiltered look into one of the hardest things in America business. Bobby was at the center. Goodson was a man whose life revolved around the swamp, his crew, and the family company he worked hard to protect guard. The series showed how dangerous it was, sacrifice and short-lived victories of a life on the edge. But when the show went off the air and left behind an uncomfortable hush that only got heavier over time, fans wanted replies, looking things up online, and sharing memories and yearning for a renewal that never came. Years went along, and now Bobby Goodson has finally told the truth about why swamp loggers will never come back. And that really is so sad. The story of the swamp loggers. Swamp Loggers was never simply another reality show on cable TV. It was our look at one of the most harsh and hard to understand swamp. Logging is one of the industries in America. Bobby was at the heart of it all. Goodson, a man whose identity and reputation were linked to the corporation his father owned. Goodson's begun decades ago, logging in all kinds of weather. This wasn't a story based on polished studio sets or drama that is written down. It was shot in the middle of North Carolina's wetlands, where the weather, water, and muck could change a most basic task into a crisis. The show took them to a world few even knew about. It came after huge machines made to do something that only human hands could never do, pulling out huge pieces of wood to doof wet ground where every step risked getting stuck in the mud. But what kept viewers came back week after week because not merely the show of machines against nature. The men were in charge of them. Men who were tough, stubborn, and loyal to honor determination and loyalty to one another. One more. Bobby was more than just a boss on screen. He was a leader who carried the weight of every paycheck, every payment for equipment and per gallon offgas. His crew looked to him for direction, and people could see that he carried something that was heavier. The taking care of the families they relied on him for a corporation that hottest last name and a way of life stuff was going away in a lot of the South. Swamp Loggers fast set itself apart from other reality shows. It wasn't about fake fights or fake drama. The strain came from genuine problems like machines getting stuck in waist-deep water, not meeting quotas, and storms flooding whole sections of wood. People liked how honest it was. They knew they were being watched. Anything real. Every shipment of logs meant survival. Every failure wasn't just a threat to one episodestrelin, but also to the very life of guys on the television. But as the season came to a conclusion, the end credits didn't feel like an end. Fans had questions? Why wasn't the show resued when it was still getting faithful fans? Why did the Goodson team did they suddenly disappear from TV? In time, the stillness would say more than the sound of any engine. The secret reasons why the program ended and why Bob never came back to TV would become as famous as the episodes themselves. The swamp as a place to fight. To get to the bottom of swamp to understand loggers, one must first understand the site where it all happened. Cutting down trees in the wetlands of North Carolina wasn't a job. Every day was a fight. To stay alive. This was not flat land for farming. Or dry woods. It was a place where equipment that weighed tens of thousands of pounds could sink like stones, where every step had to be planned out, and as nature itself appeared to fight back at every step. The swamps ate a complete pieces of equipment. Machines made forth hefty wood creaked under the constant punishment. There were a lot of repairs, and it was predicted that things would break down. Fuel was consumed at an alarming rate, often quickly than the money could come in. One wrong move in the mud may leave an equipment stuck for hours or days, wasting hundreds of dollars on things that don't work. Time and work. For people who work at it, wasn't unusual to leave theftists hurt, tired, and still not sure if the hull had changed by the end of the day. Make money. But the problems were not just muck and machines. Animals in the wild introduced another level of danger. Rattlesnakes were always a danger. Insects swarmed all over the heat of summer. Hurricanes and the season storms changed whole. Tracts of wood and tow waterlogged wastelands that forced teams to make things up or give up on employment altogether. Every day at work was a gamble, where even the most experienced logger couldn't be sure they would succeed. This was the place where Bobby Goodson made his name. Not like those who Bobby had stayed away from the wetlands, but now he was ready to go and dot them. He knew that the wood caught up in the hard rails was useful because it washer to get to. He sensed risk where others did not saw a chance. His corporation put money into specialist steer that can get around on rough ground that beat most loggers. But even with the greatest machines, the swamp demanded more than just horsepower. It took a lot of willpower. Every dawn, as his fleet roared to life, Bobby recognized that every engine in life meant more than just steel and hydraulics. Every machine was a lifeline for his employees. Every truck had thought of families waiting at home for me. He had all of it on his holders, never letting himself forget what was at stake. The luxury of forgetting what was at risk. People who don't work in the logging industry can think of it as just taking down trees. But for Bobby, it was a test of leadership and endurance. It was also a constant reminder that swamp never gave up easily. The dirt, the storms, and the animals were always fighting, and the only way to stay alive, you had to fight through them every day. Day after day. That fight that won't give up made swamp loggers and defined his existence more than TV. It was real. It was not safe. And it cost a lot in certain ways most people wouldn't get it. Fame and giving up. The realness of swamp loggers SWAT made the Discovery Channel pay attention. When the network got the show made, Bobby Goodson on this gang became famous for no good reason. The usual drudgery of logging was suddenly into homes all around. The United States, people who have never been to 8th Swamp now felt like they were on 8th front of a skier or standing next to a feller buncher as it fell huggetry trunks. People in the audience didn't connect with the staff as humans, not just characters. They laughed during the funny parts, felt the sting of problems, and cheered when a long day's work was a success. Bobby's way of leading was a mix of discipline and compassion, which made sense with people who watch. He was rough when it needed to be, yet he never forgot a booth people on his crew. For a lot of fans, he was said to have become the face-off kind of man who works hard in America, never backed down from a fight, but being famous had its own costs. Making the movie wasn't just an easy addition to their work. It changed everything about how they worked. Crews had to plan around schedules for cameras. Not enough production wasn't put off by machines breaking down, but were also delayed furthermore by the need to film every aspect. There was no more privacy. The stress got worse. What looked like exciting TV was for Bobby was walking a tightrope that could have ruined his business and peace of mind, undermined both his business and his peace of mind. Pouring that milk into cereal was an act of quiet pride. Proof that the world still worked, that the milkman had come, that breakfast was certain. It mixed with sugar, toast, and steam until every home smelled faintly of safety. Sometimes breakfast was eaten standing up, Coach Al futtoned. The wireless still muttering headlines in the background, other times it was slow. A rare Sunday when there was time for bacon, eggs, and a second cup of tea. But even on hurried mornings, there was a kind of grace to it. The scrape of chairs, the butter knife tapping the side of a jar. The low hum of conversation that filled the kitchen like another form of heat. The brands changed, but the feeling didn't. Every box on the shelf, every tin in the cupboard carried a promise that no one in the house would start that day cold or hungry. They were small luxuries disguised as routine, bits of color and sweetness that turned a damn brightish morning into something brighter. Some came and went quickly, others lasted generations. All of them left behind ghosts, flavors that still linger somewhere between memory and imagination. By the end of the 70s, breakfast had started to speed up. New adverts talked about convenience, about saving time rather than savoring it. But those older mornings, the ones filled with steam, chatter, and cereal boxes lined like soldiers along the counter, belonged to another kind of Britain. one where families didn't eat for health but for heart. By the late 70s, mornings were changing. Britain was waking faster and breakfast was learning to keep up. The kitchen still smelt of toast and tea, but the pause between waking and leaving had begun to shrink. What once felt like a ritual was becoming a routine. Weetabix Minis were among the last new faces to join the old crowd before the shelves changed for good. Smaller, neater, and easier to pour, they arrived with slogans about convenience that sounded modern then. The box still carried the familiar wheat sheath and that pale yellow glow, but something had shifted. Gone were the big biscuits that needed a minute to soak in warm milk, replaced by bite-sized ones that softened too quickly. Mothers liked them for their tidiness, but older hands missed the scrape of the spoon against a proper brick of wheat. The smaller they made the breakfast, the smaller the mornings seemed to feel. In those same years, another old friend held its ground. Shredded wheat bite size, still stamped with the Nabisco co-name and the proud line made in Welland Garden City. The boxes were plain cream and brown, without mascots or sparkle. They looked almost stern beside the newer, flasher brands. Yet inside were the same thick bundles of real wheat, coarse and hearty, the kind that needed patience. You poured the milk, sprinkled a little cigar, and waited for it to soften just a now. It filled you differently, slowly, properly, the way food did when it wasn't trying to hurry you along. Those two cereals stood at opposite ends of a disappearing world. One promising time saved, the other time remembered. Between them stretched the history of Britain's breakfast table. From the slowest of milk-hitting porridge on a frosty morning to the quick flick of a kettle for instant coffee. The change wasn't only in taste, but in rhythm. Breakfast had once been a pause, gathering before the day began. By the 1980s, it was becoming something you grabbed on the way out the door. Supermarkets carried that change like a tide. The bright cardboard faces Thetan smiled down from corner shops began to vanish. Sunny Jim, Pufferus, Force Flakes, all gone from the shelves that had once made morning skullful. In their place came plastic, polish, and slogans that promised energy, power, and speed. The language of comfort quietly disappeared. No one said warming or homely anymore. They said quick, instant, fit for the modern family. The kitchen, once the slowest room in the house, was suddenly in a race. Yet in most homes, the old sounds lingered a little longer. The whir of the toaster, the scrape of chairs, the faint tap of a spoon against the rim of a cup. Even when the cereal boxes changed, the habits didn't. Fathers still read the paper over the same mug of tea. Mothers still spread butter right to the edges off toast. Children still argued over who had more sugar in their bowl. The brands might have vanished, but the shape of the morning stayed the same, ordinary, hurried, and somehow dear. Every brand that disappeared left behind a small echo, a smell, a color. A memory of a box sitting by the window. Force Flakes fading into yellow light. Sugar puffs sticking to your fingers, the fizz of Creole foam rising in a glass. They were small things, but they built the rhythm of British life for half a century. You could almost map their years by what sat on the table. The slow comfort of malt, the crunch of corn. The sound of milk hitting a bowl just right. For many families, those breakfasts were the most constant thing in their lives. Jobs came and went, rents rose, factories closed. But the mornings still began with something warm and familiar. The kitchen was where you shook off the cold, where the radio told you what kind of day it might be, where children learned the patience of waiting for toast to brown. Every packet and tin on shelf promised the same quiet truth. The world outside might change, but the morning would always begin here with something simple and sweet. By the time the 80s rolled into the 9 South, the last of the old brands had gone. Force Flakes was a name remembered only by grandfathers. Sunny Jim's grin had vanished from shop windows. The tins of toast toppers and ins breakfasts had become curiositious at the back of cupboards. Even Woolworths, that great purveyor of cheap magic, had lost its glow. Britain itself was changing cleaner, faster, quieter, but a small part of its heart was still sitting on the kitchen table. Today, the adverts are glossier and the slogans louder, yet the best breakfasts still taste like memory. It isn't about sugar or oats or the brand on the box. It's about warmth, about how the morning light once caught the steam rising from a cup of tea, about how the first clink off a spoon meant the house was awake. Those moments have outlived every cereal mascot and frozen pancake. They belong not to brands, but to people, to families who found comfort in the small things that began their days. And if you ever catch that faint smell of malt and toast on a cold morning, you'll know it too. You'll stop for a moment, listening to a silence that isn't quite empty, because somewhere deep in the corners off memory, the kitchen is still alive. Their audio humming, the kettle rattling, thebbles lined up and waiting. The brands may have gone, but the warmth they left behind never did. It lingers quietly, like the last curl of steam from a breakfast long finished. Proof that some mornings never really